When my brother Yunshu's elbow bumped into my arm, my heart sank with a thud. The embroidered ball I'd spent 3 months stitching by hand, meant to toss to my childhood sweetheart Shijinji, instantly slipped from my grasp. It traced a humiliating arc, sailing past all the well-dressed young masters and noblemen, rolling to a stop at the feet of a beggar in the corner of the street. After a deathly silence across the venue, came overwhelming ridicule and laughter. The Grand Minister's daughter is going to marry a beggar. Shijinji watched coldly from the sidelines, as if observing a farce that had nothing to do with him. In that moment, I suddenly didn't want to cry anymore. Since you all want to see me rot in the mud, then I'll drag everyone in this cesspool down with me, and turn everything upside down. Hello fam, Faye is online. Today's story is a top-tier, clear-headed female lead power fantasy about starting against the wind, soaring in the endgame. At the grand embroidered ball matchmaking ceremony, her own brother deliberately knocked the ball down to spite his scheming adopted sister, making it roll to a beggar's feet. Her fiancé watched coldly. The whole city laughed at her. Break down crying. Not our female lead. She announced on the spot, "I accept this embroidered ball. Isn't this reverse move absolutely brilliant? Let's get into the main story." My life's most grand matchmaking ceremony became the biggest joke of my existence. Just because my dear brother Yunshu, wanting to vent for his precious adopted sister Yunchuyao, whom he treasured dearly, viciously elbowed my arm the instant I threw out the embroidered ball. Caught off guard, my fingertips went numb, and that embroidered ball carrying all my girlish dreams flew out like a kite with a broken string. It didn't land in the arms of any young master below, but instead traced an utterly humiliating arc, sailed over the surging crowd, and finally rolled with a gulu-gulu to the feet of a beggar huddled in a corner at the end of the long street. Time seemed to freeze for an instant. Then, thunderous roars of laughter and chatter exploded, like countless poisoned needles, all stabbing toward me. Oh my God! The young lady of the minister's manor is going to marry a beggar. This is truly the joke of the century. Minister Yun's face will be completely lost. I stood on the ornately decorated winehouse in the most magnificent dress of my life, yet the blood in my body turned cold inch by inch, my entire person frozen in place, like a jade sculpture about to shatter. Beside me, the culprit Yunshu put on an earnest and well-meaning appearance, leaned close to my ear to comfort me in a low voice. Yet his words were like knives. "Ah, Shu, don't blame your brother. Last time you pushed Yao Yao into the lake in front of everyone, making her seriously ill. She has been holding this grudge ever since. I just wanted you to make a little fool of yourself during the embroidered ball toss, to let her vent. Yao Yao is still a child with a simple nature. As her older sister, what is wrong with giving in to her a little? Don't worry, this is just for show. Father and I would never actually let you marry a beggar." Every single word of his was like a dull knife, cutting back and forth across my heart. I never pushed Yonchiao. She slipped and fell into the water herself, but cried and pointed at me in front of everyone. But no one believed me. Now, with his casual remark of "just for show," he pushed me into an abyss of no return, making me the laughingstock of the entire capital. Seeing the discussions downstairs becoming increasingly unbearable, Yunshu cleared his throat lightly and suddenly raised his voice, trying to take control of the situation. "Everyone, quiet down. My little sister's hand slipped just now. That doesn't count. We'll do it again." As he spoke, he discreetly shot a glance at Shijinji in the crowd. "Shijinji, my childhood sweetheart, son of the Vice Minister of Personnel, and also my intended husband choice for today. That young man I thought would always stand by my side. Like a puppet on strings, I instinctively raised my eyes to look. Shijinji was leaning against the carved railing not far away, his lake blue brocade robe making his face look like jade, elegant and graceful. However, when his gaze met mine, those eyes I had been infatuated with for 10 years held only cold distance and impatience. Not only did he not step forward to help me out of this situation, he straightened up instead and declared loudly, "Brother Yun, you are mistaken. Throwing the embroidered ball to choose a husband is all about fate and fairness. How could there be any reason to throw it again?" He paused, his gaze sweeping over my pale face, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint, almost imperceptible sneer. The prestigious minister's manner. Surely you are not planning to go back on your word in front of all the people of the capital. My heart felt as if it had been seized by an invisible hand, instantly stopping its beat. My fingers clutching my skirt turned white from the force, my nails digging deep into my palm. The crowd of onlookers around us was immediately stirred up by him, echoing one after another. Exactly, young Marquis, she is right. How can an embroidered ball that has been thrown out be taken back? Doesn't the minister's manor always value keeping their word? How can they go back on it today? Don't tell me they look down on us common folk and think our witness doesn't count. The situation spiraled completely out of control. Yunshu's face turned from pale to flushed. He clearly hadn't expected Shi Jinji to publicly undermine him. Furious, he pointed at him. Shi Jinji, you grew up with my sister since childhood, and you even vowed in your youth that you'd marry no one but her in this life. Now, how can you say such things? From the private room on the second floor, the idle chatter of several notorious playboys from the capital drifted down, neither too loud nor too soft, yet clearly reaching my ears. What else could it be? Young Marquis Xia has long since fallen for someone else. Exactly. Just yesterday I saw it with my own eyes. Shi Jinji took that adopted daughter from the minister's residence, second, Miss Yun, to Yuzhen workshop to pick out the new rouge and powder. He was so attentive and considerate. I heard he was practically dragged here today by Minister Yun. If you ask me, he never wanted to catch this embroidered ball in the first place. This way, it is exactly what he wanted. So that is how it is. So, there were signs all along. I gently lowered my lashes, forcing back all the moisture swirling madly in my eyes. The sharp pain in my chest gradually turned into a numb coldness. I took a deep breath, and amid the mockery and clamor enough to drown a person, I stepped forward. My voice wasn't loud, even carrying a trace of trembling, yet every word was clear, exploding like thunder in everyone's ears. Who says this embroidered ball doesn't count? I lifted my head and looked around at the shocked faces upstairs and downstairs, finally fixing my gaze on Shijinji's frozen smile. Word by word, I used all my strength to declare my fate. The embroidered ball has fallen to the ground. This is heaven's will. This marriage, I accept it. Yun Xiangshu, have you lost your mind? Yunshu suddenly turned his head, gripping my wrist tightly, his voice urgent and harsh. Do you even know what you are saying? You are the distinguished daughter of the minister. How can you marry a beggar? I turned my head to look at him, and the redness in my eyes that I'd been suppressing finally leaked out. I remember 3 years ago when I was found and brought back from the countryside. He was also the first to rush up and hug me, saying to me, "Ah Shu, don't be afraid, your brother will never let you suffer again." Once upon a time, he truly was that good brother who sheltered me under his wings and cared for me in every way. But now, just because of foster sister Yun Chuyao's baseless claim of being pushed into the water, he could personally push me into such an irredeemable situation on the most important day of my life. I tugged at the corner of my mouth, revealing an extremely faint, extremely cold sneer. Yun Shu, isn't this exactly what you hoped for? Now the distinguished daughter of the minister is about to marry a beggar and become the laughingstock of the entire capital. Your dear sister Yun Chuyao must be satisfied now, right? Yun Shu was choked by my words, stunned for a moment. Then his brows furrowed tightly, his tone full of disapproval and disappointment. You are still blaming Yao Yao? That matter was clearly you making a mountain out of a molehill. Her behavior today is nothing more than a little girl's petty tantrum. I couldn't hear a single word of the excuses that followed. I forcefully shook off his hand, lifted my elaborate skirt, turned around, and step by step descended that staircase leading to hell. The crowd of onlookers parted like a tide to both sides, spontaneously clearing a path of shame for me. Those probing, sympathetic, contemptuous, and gloating gazes were like countless fine needles, piercing into my body, leaving no room to breathe. As I passed by Shi Jinji, he suddenly called out to stop me, "Yun Xiangshu." His voice still carried a condescending, self-righteous admonishment. There is no need for you to say such nonsense in public, just to spite me. I stopped in my tracks but didn't turn back. He seemed to think his words had an effect, stepped forward, and his tone softened a bit, as if he really was thinking of me. We've grown up together since childhood. I've always treated you like a little sister. Rest assured. In the future, I'll definitely help you find a good match of equal social standing, and will never let you suffer any grievance. The 3 words, little sister, were like a red, hot iron rod, viciously piercing into my heart. I finally turned my head back, forcing out a mocking smile that looked even worse than crying. Biological younger sister. Shijinji was rendered speechless for a moment by my gaze, a flash of guilt quickly passing through his eyes. My gaze was like an ice-tempered blade, my voice cold without a trace of warmth. Shijinji, admitting that you've had a change of heart and fallen for someone else would be better than using the excuse of younger sister now. It is both hypocritical and chilling. His face instantly turned pale, his lips moving as if wanting to explain something. But in the end, under my gaze, he couldn't say anything. I didn't give him any more chances, withdrew my gaze, and walked past him without looking sideways. Every step felt like treading on knife points. Finally, I reached the man huddled in the street corner, wearing tattered clothes covered in mud and filth. The noisy discussions around us came to an abrupt halt at this moment. Yunshu stood by the railing on the 2nd floor, his face ashen, eyes filled with urgency and fury, leaning down and shouting at me, "Yunshangshu, have you lost your mind? Get back here right now!" Shijinji also stood not far away, gazing at me with a heavy look, his lips pressed into a tight line, his expression complex and indecipherable. In this instant, everyone's eyes were focused on me, waiting to see how I would handle this situation. I paid no attention to anyone. I just slowly crouched down, looking up at the man before me, his face covered in filth, his body covered in wounds, his breath faint, without even the strength to lift his eyes. I reached out my hand and gently picked up the embroidered ball that had rolled to his feet, already stained with dust. Then, looking at his face obscured by disheveled hair, I used the last bit of my strength to slowly speak. "Will you marry me?" The air fell deathly silent. Everyone held their breath. After a long while, the man finally moved. He struggled to lift his head, and beneath his dirty hair, a pair of eyes shone startlingly bright, bottomlessly deep, as if they could draw one's soul in. His Adam's apple rolled rapidly several times, and his dust-covered lips parted slightly. He spoke. His voice was hoarse and dry, yet carried a clarity that clashed with his appearance, like shattered ice plunging into a mountain spring. "You won't regret this?" Looking into those eyes, the crazy notion in my heart became even clearer. I answered word by word with absolute certainty. "Never? Good!" He pulled a faint smile, and though his face was too dirty to see clearly, it inexplicably put one's heart at ease. "I'll marry you." With that, he pulled out a slightly cracked jade pendant from his chest and placed it in my palm. 3 days from now, meet me at the tea house south of the city." When I returned to the minister's manor, the sky was already nearing dusk. As soon as I stepped into the main hall, I saw father, mother, and my elder brother Yunshu gathered around a pear wood table. Yunshuya was there too, a family of 4, harmonious and content. The table was covered with various rare fabrics, clearly for selecting material to tailor new clothes for Yunshuya. My father, Yun Zhenggong, had his back to the entrance, his voice booming and full of vigor. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Today's incident has completely disgraced the Yun family." My mother, Lady Liu, was leisurely examining a bolt of cloud brocade. Without even lifting her head, she glanced at him and said, "Enough. When Ah Shu comes back, don't scold her anymore. You know her temperament. She explodes at the slightest criticism, and then the whole household will be in chaos again." She paused, holding the cloud brocade up against Yunshuya to compare, her tone certain. I imagine she only said those thoughtless words about marrying a beggar out of spite because her brother embarrassed her in public. Right now, she doesn't even know that beggar's name or where he lives. Even if you gave her 10 times the courage, she wouldn't dare actually marry him. Once she calms down, this matter will naturally pass. Yun Chuyao immediately cooperated by squeezing out a few tears, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief, her voice choked with emotion. "Father, mother, it is all my fault. If brother hadn't stood up for me, sister wouldn't have gotten so angry and said such things out of spite." My mother immediately pulled her into her arms with heartache, wiping her tears with a handkerchief, comforting her gently. My dear daughter, how could this be your fault? Since she came back home, your father and I have made you suffer quite a bit to accommodate that bad temper she developed in the countryside. You just played a harmless little joke on her. That is all. It is her own narrow-mindedness that can't take it seriously. My father chimed in. Yao Yao, this has nothing to do with you. Don't worry, your sister is just like that, sharp tongue but soft heart. She is just throwing a tantrum at us. She definitely won't really joke around with her own lifelong happiness. As she spoke, my mother picked up a piece of water, red soft satin, and handed it to Yun Chuyao, her face blooming again with an indulgent smile. Good baby! Hurry and pick the color you like. Otherwise, when your sister comes back later and sees it, she'll get jealous and insist on fighting you for it. Just as she was speaking, the corner of my mother's eye inadvertently glanced, and suddenly caught sight of me standing quietly behind them, not knowing how long I'd been listening. The smile on her face instantly froze, and the fabric in her hand dropped back onto the table with a thud. The cheerful laughter in the hall came to an abrupt halt. 4 people, 8 eyes, all turned to look at me in unison, their expressions somewhat unspeakably awkward and unnatural. If it were before, I would have rushed up like a madwoman, hysterically questioning them why they turned a blind eye to my suffering, why their eyes only ever had Yun Chuyao. But today, perhaps too exhausted, perhaps my heart has turned to ash, I can no longer muster even the slightest bit of hope for this so-called home. Under their tense, guarded, and slightly irritated gazes, I said nothing, didn't even let my eyes linger on them for a moment, simply turned around and went back to my own courtyard. Behind me came my mother's tentative call. Ah, shoo. I didn't stop. 3 years ago, I got lost by accident and completely lost contact with my family. Those 3 years, I was barely clothed, barely fed, and to survive, I endured all the suffering in the world. And my parents, after a brief period of grief, quickly brought in Yun Chuyao, an orphaned distant cousin from my mother's side of the family. Just because she bore some resemblance to how I looked as a child, they transferred all their love and guilt for me onto her. As time went on, gradually, everyone almost forgot that the minister's manor once had a legitimate eldest daughter. Until half-year ago, when I was found and brought back home in tattered clothes, covered in wounds. The night I returned home, I thought with all my heart that I could finally escape from the sea of suffering. But I stood outside the door, hearing with my own ears as my mother held the weeping Yun Chuyao and gently comforted her. Yao Yao, you will always be father and mother's daughter. This will never change because of anyone's return. Besides, your sister was abducted to the countryside for 3 years with no one to teach her. Her temperament has become increasingly crude and unbearable, her words and actions vulgar and rude. How could she be as well behaved, sensible, educated, and reasonable as you are, the kind that people love? At that moment, it was as if someone had poured a bucket of ice water over me from head to toe. A bone-chilling cold shot straight up from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. I stood there frozen, unable to move for a very long time, so in their hearts, I, their biological daughter who had been lost and found, was actually crude and unbearable, was unlikable. So my return was not a joy of being reunited with what was lost, but rather a nuisance that disrupted their current happy life. 3 days later, following the token that Beggar had left behind that day, a fragment of broken jade pendant, I met him at an inconspicuous tea house in the south of the city. When I arrived, there weren't many people in the tea house. I picked a seat by the window and sat down, fingers wrapped around the warm rim of the celadon cup, my gaze falling on the pattering rain threads outside the window, my mind in complete disarray. I didn't know whether today's decision was right or wrong. I only knew that I didn't want to stay in that suffocating home for even one more moment. Just as I was lost in wild thoughts, an oiled paper umbrella entered my view. Beneath it, a face bearing several faint scars yet still strikingly handsome gradually became clear through the curtain of rain. He closed the umbrella, shook off the moisture, and walked straight toward me. I snapped back to my senses, watching him approach. My mind thundering, the young man before me wore coarse cloth garments washed until faded, with several patches on them, but laundered extremely clean. His figure was upright, his features refined and handsome, his eyes deep, set, his nose bridge high and straight. Apart from those few unhealed scars on his face, where was there even half a trace of destitution? So it turned out, the appearance he'd hidden beneath dust and grime that day was actually this striking. "Miss Yun, don't you recognize me?" The young man's voice was clear and crisp, like a cold mountain spring carrying a hint of barely perceptible amusement that easily drowned out the sound of rain outside the window. I instinctively tightened my grip on the teacup, cleared my throat while forcing composure, and spoke. "What is your name?" The man took a seat across from me, his slender, clean fingers lifting the teapot from the table. He first refilled half a cup of hot tea for me, before pouring one for himself. Those flowing movements, that composed and unhurried bearing, revealed an innately noble air that clashed completely with his clothing. "Zhang Yu." He lifted his eyes, his gaze locking straight onto me. Zhang as in rivers and lakes, Yu as in encounter. I suppressed the surging astonishment in my heart, pulled out several banknotes I had prepared from my sleeve, and pushed them in front of him. "Half a month from now, you'll come to the Yun residence to present the betrothal gifts. This money should be enough for you to prepare your attire, the 3 matchmakers and 6 ceremonies. Not a single one can be missing." I didn't want to give the Yun family any excuse to say I married under unclear circumstances. Zhang Yu merely glanced indifferently at the banknotes on the table, but didn't take them. Instead, he lifted his eyes, those deep eyes carrying a hint of inquiry and a touch of teasing. "Does Miss Yun truly want to marry someone like me, penniless with an uncertain future?" My heart tightened, and for some reason a competitive spirit arose instead. I coldly retorted, "What? Are you scared? Afraid of the minister's residence's power and influence, too afraid to marry me now?" He suddenly let out a low laugh, a pleasant vibration coming from his chest. He extended his finger and gently pushed that stack of banknotes back toward me, his movement gentle yet carrying an undeniable force. "What do you mean?" I frowned, a trace of displeasure rising in my heart. Was he going back on his word? Presenting betrothal gifts to marry Miss Yun is my, Zhang Yu's, affair. He raised his eyes, fine fragments of light filling their depths, his tone calm yet resolute. How could there be any reason to have the young lady pay for it herself? I froze completely. He met my astonished gaze and continued. "Just wait. In half a month, I will definitely prepare the betrothal gifts and come to marry you in grand style with an 8-bearer bridal sedan." His words were like a pebble tossed into the dead lake of my heart, rippling outward in circles. In all my years, no one had ever said such words to me. In the Yun family, whatever I wanted, I had to fight for it myself, to snatch it. If I couldn't fight for it, couldn't snatch it, I could only watch as others took away what I loved. I never knew that being firmly chosen by someone felt like this. My eyes suddenly grew hot. I sniffled, forcefully suppressing that sudden surge of bitterness, yet my voice remained clear. "If possible, please make it as soon as you can." I really didn't want to stay in that house for even one more day. Catching a glimpse of the barely concealed redness and vulnerability in my eyes, the smile on Zhang Yu's face faded slightly, and his figure paused. He swallowed, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an undeniable solemnity. "All right." Returning home from the tea-house, the household had already started the evening meal. Tonate's dinner table was particularly lively, because Shi Jinji was also there. He sat right beside Yun Chuyao, lowering his head to serve her food, his expression tender. The moment I stepped through the hall door, the room full of cheerful laughter once again came to an abrupt halt. Brother Yun Shu was the first to react. He put down his chopsticks and waved at me, his face showing a somewhat deliberate enthusiasm. "Xiang Shu, you are back? Come over and eat. The kitchen made your favorite lotus chicken slices today." I shook my head, my gaze sweeping lightly over Shi Jinji and Yun Chuyao's clasped hands, only feeling a wave of nausea churning in my stomach. "I am not hungry, you guys eat. I'll head back to my room first." Seeing me turn to leave, my mother Liu Shi suddenly called out to stop me. "Xiang Shu, wait. Mother has something to discuss with you." I stopped in place without turning around. "What is it?" She rose from her seat and slowly walked in front of me, her face showing some hesitation and difficulty, carefully opening her mouth, It is like this. Your father and I have discussed it and decided that next month we'll finalize the marriage between your younger sister and Jinji. Even though I had anticipated it, when I heard it with my own ears, my heart still felt like it was pricked by a needle. I slowly raised my face and looked past her shoulder in Jinji's direction. He seemed to sense my gaze and instinctively turned his face away, avoiding my line of sight. Seeing this, I mockingly curved the corners of my lips. When my mother saw me like this, thinking I was heartbroken, she hurriedly grasped my ice cold hand and explained urgently, "Ah, Shu, mother knows you grew up with Jinji since childhood and have deep feelings for him, but matters of the heart have never been about who came first. What matters is mutual affection. You and Jinji ultimately have fate but no destiny together." She patted the back of my hand, making empty promises. "Don't worry, mother guarantees that in the future I will find you a match even better than the Shi family to properly compensate you." I calmly withdrew my hand and coldly interrupted her. "I have no objections." I turned around, facing that perfect couple, and pulled out a standard emotionless smile. "Congratulations, little sister. Congratulations, brother-in-law. I wish you both a harmonious union for 100 years, and may you have children soon." Having said that, I didn't look at any of them again and left directly. I didn't expect Shi Jinji would chase after me. Under the covered corridor leading to my courtyard, he blocked my way, grabbing my wrist with surprising force. "Jinji, let go. What are you trying to do?" I frowned, struggling hard. But he gripped even tighter, lowering his eyes slightly, his voice carrying a barely perceptible softness. "Ah, Shu, I know you were just speaking out of anger earlier in your heart. You must be feeling terrible right now, aren't you?" Feeling terrible? It seemed. Not really. At most, I just find it laughable. Laughable that I once thought the boy who publicly vowed in our childhood that he would marry no one but me would forever stand by my side, forever be my support. But he still changed the human heart, it turns out, is such an easily changeable thing. Seeing that I hadn't spoken for a long time, Shijinji presumptuously assumed he had hit upon my inner thoughts. He let out a soft sigh, softened his voice, and spoke on his own. "Ah, Shu, after all, we grew up together, and we once loved each other. I really don't want us to reach this point today where we're like strangers." His words made me feel utterly absurd. He paused, as if making up his mind about something, and finally stated his real purpose for chasing after me. "How about this? I can go discuss with Uncle Yun and Auntie. Let you and Chuyao marry me together, without distinction of rank, both as equal wives. How about that?" I raised my head abruptly in disbelief, staring at him intently. I could hardly believe that such shameless words could come out of his mouth. Seeing my eyes widen, he thought I was too happy to speak, and a trace of arrogance and smugness immediately appeared on his face. He adjusted his sleeves, putting on a condescending attitude. "However, you must first agree to one condition. After marrying into my Shia residence, you must change that willful temperament of yours, and can no longer be like before, constantly targeting Chuyao everywhere. You must be united as sisters with her, and get along harmoniously." I couldn't listen to it anymore. A massive wave mixed with absurdity and humiliation instantly drowned me. I used all my strength to push him away fiercely and roared at the top of my lungs. "Get lost." Half a month's time passed in a flash. This day happened to be the eve of Yun Chuyao's 21st birthday. It was also the day before Jiang Yu would come to marry me. Regarding my marriage to a destitute person, those raging rumors in the streets had long been suppressed and died down under my father's deliberate pressure and cold treatment. They were all convinced that I was just throwing a tantrum that day and would never dare to joke about my lifelong matter. They thought that as long as they didn't mention it and I didn't make a fuss, this matter would be completely forgotten as if it had never happened. But they didn't know that my heart had already been wounded beyond repair that day, and I had completely lost hope in this family. I had long wanted to leave. At the crack of dawn, just as I was about to push open the door, rustling sounds of deliberately lowered voices came from outside the courtyard. It was Yunshu's voice, with a hint of impatience. "Let's go quickly. What are you dawdling for? If that someone wakes up later and finds out, we're taking Yao Yao to Yangzhou for her coming of age ceremony, she'll start crying and clinging to us again to stop us from leaving." My mother Liu's voice carried a hint of hesitation. "Are we really just leaving Ah Shu alone at home like this? Isn't that a bit wrong? Will she be sad?" My father Yun Zhonggong's voice immediately rang out, with an unquestionable urgency. "Aya, stop overthinking it. I finally managed to get 3 days off from the yamen, just to accompany Yao Yao to Yangzhou to see the Kuanghua flowers. There are over 100 servants in this manor to attend to her. Surely she won't starve to death, will she? Let's go, let's go." Right after came Yun Chuyao's voice, feigning understanding. "Father, mother, how about we take elder sister along with us? Leaving her alone at home, I feel uneasy too." Yun Shu immediately let out 2 light tacks. "If you bring her along, do you still want to have a proper birthday or not? That mouth of hers and her talent for ruining the mood, you know it well enough. All right, forget about her. Let's hurry up and leave." An incense stick's time later, the sound of the carriage departing rang out, and the entire courtyard fell completely silent. To avoid me, they actually left the manor a day early. The next morning, I slowly pushed open the door and looked up at the cloudless azure sky. What a perfect day for a wedding. I called over the only maid in my courtyard who was still willing to listen to me. "Baokui, help me dress up and put on the wedding gown." Baokui's eyes reddened, her voice choked with emotion. "Miss, have you really thought this through?" I nodded at myself in the mirror, pale-faced, yet with unusually calm eyes. "I've made up my mind." I had never been more clear-headed than I was at this moment. I never expected that Zhang Yu would actually hire an 8-bearer palanquin to marry me. The sound of Suona horns came from the other end of the long street, drawing closer from afar, festive and flamboyant. Not only that, he had also spent a fortune to hire an entire troupe of musicians, playing and beating drums all the way from the head of Chang'an Street, arriving at the gates of the minister's residence in grand procession. The onlooking crowd was a sea of people, even more than on the day of my matchmaking event. Candied dates and wedding candies were scattered into the crowds lining the streets as if they cost nothing, handful after handful. I sat in the empty main hall, listening to the deafening Suona horns and gong sounds, thinking, where did he, a destitute young master who had nothing to his name, get so much money to put on such a lavish wedding? But recalling the bearing and manner he displayed when we met that day, a strong intuition told me that his true identity was far from simple. So be it. No matter who he was, it had to be better than staying in this household. I lifted my skirt, and under the astonished gazes of the servants of the minister's residence, walked out step by step on my own, personally lifting the palanquin curtain. As the palanquin was lifted, I took one last look at that gold-embossed plaque reading, Minister's Residence. From this moment on, this place would no longer be my home. The Yun family's carriage had only traveled halfway when they received news of a sudden flood in Yangzhou and the canal being blocked. The group had no choice but to return home disappointed. The moment Father Yun Zhenggong stepped through the manor gates, he felt the atmosphere inside was unusually quiet. Yun Mother Lady Liu was the first to sense something was wrong. She grabbed a passing maid and asked, "Where is the eldest miss?" The little maid dropped to her knees with a thud, her body trembling like autumn leaves in the wind, her voice choked with tears. "Master, madam, the eldest miss. Yesterday she got married and left the manor." "Married to whom?" Yunshu asked with a frown. It was that man who caught the embroidered ball last time." The little maid's voice grew smaller and smaller. "That person even hired a wedding band and an 8-bearer sedan chair, parading all the way from Chang'an Street to the outskirts of the city. Now everyone in the entire capital knows about it." Upon hearing this, Lady Liu felt her vision go dark, the world spinning around her, and her body fell straight backward. "Mother?" Yun Chuyao quickly supported her, helping her catch her breath while sighing repeatedly, her face full of hartosh and grief. "How could elder sister do this? Even if it is to spite us, she shouldn't do something that brings such disgrace to our family." She turned her body at a cunning angle, and Yunshu, standing nearby, happened to catch that fleeting trace of smugness at the corner of her mouth that she hadn't yet concealed. At that instant, Yunshu was struck as if by lightning, his entire body frozen in shock. He suddenly recalled my hoarse questioning that day, recalled the inextricable despair in my eyes. A terrifying thought began to grow wildly in his heart. Chu Yao. His voice was ice, cold without a trace of warmth. Tell me honestly, what you told me before about Shang Shu pushing you into the lake, was it true or false? Yun Chu Yao's face turned pale in an instant, her eyes panicked. Just as she was about to explain, she was abruptly cut off by Yun Shu. You'd better think carefully before you speak. If I find out you lied. Yun Chu Yao's hands hidden under her sleeves trembled uncontrollably. Finally, unable to withstand that oppressive gaze, tears burst from her eyes as she admitted through sobs. It was me being careless. My foot slipped, and I fell into the lake. So you framed Shang Shu? Yun Shu's eyes widened in disbelief, his voice trembling. His face was frighteningly cold, about to explode in anger. When Yun father, Yun Zhenggong, suddenly shouted sternly from the side, "Enough! It is just a little friction between sisters. Yao Yao was just scared for a moment, playing a joke. Why are you getting angry at her?" Yun Shu was completely stunned. He suddenly remembered that in the past, every time Yun Shu Yao suffered a grievance, Shang Shu would argue with them like this, time and time again, eyes red, stubbornly defending herself. I didn't push her, I didn't break it, I didn't curse at her. But from beginning to end, not a single one of them had ever seriously listened to a word she said. They only thought she was making excuses, being unreasonable. Thinking of this, Yun Shu's heart felt as if it was being viciously squeezed by a giant hand, the pain making it almost impossible for him to breathe. Without a word, he turned around in a daze and returned to his own bedroom. Zhang Yu rented a small courtyard at the end of an alley in the outskirts of the city. When my father and the others came looking for me with their servants in an aggressive manner, Zhang Yu had just gone out to buy supplies. The old copper lock on the courtyard gate was kicked open by a servant. My father barged in with his men, pointed at me as I was trimming flowers in the courtyard, and scolded me harshly. "Yun Shang Shu, you disobedient daughter, you've dragged the face of our minister's manor through the mud. Come back with me immediately." I put down the scissors in my hand, slowly raised my head, and looked at him calmly. "I am already married. This is my home now. The affairs of the minister's manor have nothing to do with me, and you have no right to control me." He acted as if he'd heard the biggest joke in the world, so angry that even his beard was trembling. "Parents' orders, matchmakers' words. Which of these do you have? Without the family's approval, what kind of marriage is this? This is elopement." As the atmosphere grew tense, my mother stepped forward, grabbed my ice, cold hand, and tearfully urged me. "Ah Shu, come home with mother. Stop being stubborn. By tormenting yourself like this, are you trying to break your mother's heart?" I raised my head, looked at the genuine grief on her face, and spoke in a voice cold as ice. "Fine, you want me to go back, don't you?" I paused, then said word by word. "As long as you expel Yun Chu Yao from the minister's manor." "No." My father and mother spoke almost in unison, blurting it out without a second thought. I laughed mockingly. "See, that is the answer." My father was completely enraged by my laughter. He immediately raised his hand and roared furiously. "You ungrateful, rebellious daughter!" The fierce wind from his palm, wrapped in fury, came slapping hard toward my cheek. I instinctively closed my eyes, but the sharp pain I imagined never came. I suddenly opened my eyes, only to see several royal guards in black robes and masks had appeared before me at some point, surrounding me protectively in an absolute defensive stance. The leader's hand, like an iron clamp, firmly gripped my father's wrist that was about to strike down, rendering him immobile. Suddenly, a clear yet somewhat cold voice drifted over from outside the crowd. "I would like to ask my father-in-law, why are you laying hands on my wife in broad daylight?" Everyone turned to look in the direction of the voice. When Zhang Yu slowly walked in from outside the door, I almost didn't dare recognize him. He had changed into a moon, white brocade robe with subtle patterns, his waist bound with a jade belt. The stray hair that previously covered his forehead was now held up by a white jade hairpin, revealing a smooth and full forehead. That exceptionally handsome face was so stunning in the sunlight that one dared not look directly at it. His entire bearing was elegant, noble, and commanding. My father froze. Then, when his gaze fixed firmly on the ink, colored jade pendant at Zhang Yu's waist, carved with coiling dragons and auspicious clouds, swaying slightly as he walked. His face turned white inch by inch, rapidly draining of all color until completely bloodless. His legs went weak, and with a thud he collapsed to his knees, his voice trembling uncontrollably. You are the crown prince of the Li dynasty?" The figures of everyone in the residence scrambled and tumbled away, disappearing at the alley entrance. In the small courtyard, finally only Zhang Yu and I remained. Ever since learning he was the crown prince of the Li dynasty, I had fallen into a strange state of constraint and unease. He seemed to see through my discomfort, and took the initiative to soften his tone, patiently explaining to me. "I was originally sent by my father, the emperor, on a diplomatic mission to Great Way to discuss the matter of connecting our two countries by canal. But unexpectedly, I was ambushed and pursued on the way. My attendants scattered, and I was severely injured. To avoid disaster, I had no choice but to change into shabby clothes and hide in the capital. After narrowly escaping, I collapsed unconscious in the streets due to severe injuries. When I woke up again, I just happened to catch your embroidered ball." At this point, Zhang Yu's tone shifted, and a warm smile spread across his deep eyes. "Actually, that day wasn't our first meeting." I froze for a moment. "What?" "The day I first arrived in the capital, before my whereabouts were exposed, I rested at a temple outside the city." He looked at me, his tone carrying a hint of nostalgia and anticipation. "At that time, you were offering incense at the temple. Seeing my tattered clothes, you mistook me for a destitute pilgrim. You not only gave me a few flatbreads, but also some loose silver." He gazed into my eyes and asked softly, "Do you still remember?" I tried hard to search through my memories, but those 3 years of wandering life had made me develop a habit of never looking back at the past. Many things had long become blurred and unclear. After pondering for a moment, I could only shake my head and honestly say, "I don't remember." The smile on Zhang Yu's face visibly stiffened, as if somewhat defeated, looking at his expression. For some reason, I found it somewhat amusing, and my ears quietly flushed red. The tense atmosphere actually relaxed quite a bit in this silent exchange of gazes. That night, Zhang Yu found 2 rattan chairs from somewhere and placed them under the old locust tree in the courtyard. We sat side by side, the evening breeze blowing gently, cicadas chirping softly at the base of the courtyard wall, with a sky full of stars overhead. Zhang Yu told me many things that happened to him in the Li dynasty, about his mother, his brothers, and his experiences growing up. As he spoke, he suddenly stopped, turned to look at me, his gaze as gentle as water. "What about you before you met me? What kind of girl were you?" My fingertips lightly traced the rough texture on the armrest of the rattan chair, and I lowered my eyes slightly. After a long while, I finally spoke in a low voice, someone who could be easily abandoned at any time. Jiang Yu's breathing paused for a moment, but he said nothing. He just quietly, imperceptibly moved his rattan chair closer to mine, until his shoulder gently leaned against mine, transmitting a warm, steady comfort through the thin fabric. I continued speaking, my voice very soft, very soft. I talked about the hardships of those 3 years when I was lost, about the cautiousness and sense of not belonging after being found and brought home, about Yun Chuyao's every scheme and my family's every act of favoritism. I talked about that day at the matchmaking ceremony, my brother's betrayal, my childhood friend's indifference, and the mockery of the entire city. When I spoke of these things, it was as if I were telling someone else's story, so calm there wasn't a single ripple. But as I spoke to the end, I suddenly felt my nose tingle a bit. I raised my hand, wanting to rub my stinging eyes, but Jiang Yu's warm, large palm gently grasped my wrist. The warmth from his palm passed through the fabric continuously, very steady, very warm. He didn't say useless things like, "Don't be sad," or "It is all in the past." He just looked at me earnestly with those eyes full of starlight, and said in an incredibly solemn tone in a low voice, "Shang Shu, it won't happen again. With me, you will always be the person who should be cherished the most. No one can abandon you again. Once we finish dealing with the matters of Great Way, you'll return to Li Dynasty with me, and I will announce to the world and make up for you with the grandest and most magnificent wedding ceremony in all 6 kingdoms." I looked up at him. The starlight in Jiang Yu's eyes was brighter and warmer than all the stars in the sky combined. At that moment, I clearly felt my heart, which had been silent for 22 years, suddenly and violently flutter for him. The next day, carrying the broken silver Jiang Yu gave me, I went to the fabric shop at the street corner to pick out some seasonal clothing materials. My fingertips had just touched a bolt of moon, white soft satin, when a coquettish yet deliberately sharp and sarcastic voice came from behind me. "Shopkeeper, this bolt of fabric, this young lady wants it." I turned around, and sure enough saw Yun Chuyao's annoying face. Beside her were several close girlfriends she usually associated with. She stepped forward, reaching out to snatch the fabric from my hands, her chin held high. "Sister, I am attending the eldest princess's flower viewing banquet next month, and I am in need of fabric in this exact color to make a new dress. You now—" She looked me up and down, the disdain in her eyes unconcealed. "You have no use for such fine fabric anymore, so just let your sister have it." I gripped the corner of the fabric tightly, refusing to yield even an inch, looking at her coldly. "First come, first served, don't you understand?" "You!" Yun Chuyao was speechless with anger. During the tussle, a small commotion suddenly came from the entrance of the fabric shop. "Young Master Shi, you are back from Jiangnan?" I instinctively looked up and saw Shi Jinji standing at the entrance. Travel-worn, his blue robe still stained with dust from the journey. He had clearly just returned to the capital and didn't yet know about what had happened these past few days. His gaze swept between me and Yun Chuyao, first habitually furrowing his brow, then looking at me, speaking in a matter-of-fact, unquestionable tone. "Shangshu, let Chuyao have it. It is just a piece of fabric. Why must you always quibble with her?" I was so angered by his words that I laughed, retorting, "Why should I?" Shi Jinji saw that I was still being so stubborn and obstinate. His brows furrowed even deeper, and his tone carried several degrees of obvious impatience. "Yun Shangshu, have you forgotten what I told you before?" I said. "If you want to marry into my Xia manor together with Chuyao, the only requirement is that from now on you must restrain your temperament and stop targeting Chuyao at every turn." I was just about to speak when suddenly a familiar, clear male voice came from behind me, carrying a hint of warmth with a smile, unhurried and calm. "Oh, I didn't know that my wife had any plans to marry into the Xia manor." Shi Jinji whipped his head around sharply, and when he saw clearly who it was, the expression on his face instantly froze. "What did you say?" Jiang Yu was wearing a light cyan brocade robe, still holding a package of osmanthus sugar cakes that I had casually mentioned wanting to eat yesterday, and walked in slowly from outside the door. Without even glancing at anyone else, he walked straight to my side, pulled me into his embrace with complete naturalness, drawing me closer to him, full of possessiveness. Then, he raised his eyes to look at Shi Jinji, whose face had turned ashen, and spoke in an unhurried manner. "Young Master Shi must have just returned from Jiangnan. Perhaps you haven't yet heard the recent fresh news from the capital." He curved his lips, his voice not loud, yet enough for everyone in the fabric shop to hear clearly. 3 days ago, Shangshu and I were married. Now she is my wife, properly wedded through matchmaker by me, Jiang Yu. The words, wife and spouse, struck Shi Jinji's head, like a heavy hammer. The gentle, refined mask on his face finally shattered completely. He whipped his head around sharply, looking at Yun Chuyao beside him, whose face had already turned deathly pale with fright, his voice trembling. "What he said, is it true?" Yun Chuyao no longer dared to hide anything. She stepped back half a step, her voice as faint as a mosquito's buzz. He is the one who caught elder sister's embroidered ball that day, and he is also the crown prince of the Li dynasty." Zi Jinji was thunderstruck, staring at me fixedly, the bloodshot veins in his eyes rapidly spreading, full of shock and disbelief. "Shangshu, you really married him?" Before I could speak, Jiang Yu directly blocked my front, completely cutting off Shi Jinji's line of sight. He lowered his head and asked me gently, "You like this bolt of fabric? Then let's buy it." As he spoke, without even asking the price, he directly pulled out a silver ingot of considerable weight from his sleeve, and tossed it to the shopkeeper, who had long been stunned speechless. "This bolt of fabric, and all the fabrics this young lady touched just now, we'll take them all." When Jongyu and I left together hand in hand, Shijinji was still frozen in place like a petrified statue. I heard him, lost and distraught, continuously murmuring that sentence over and over. How is this possible? How could she marry someone else? The person she loves most, isn't it me? Half a month later, news came from the palace that the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet would widely invite all officials and their families, including Prince Jiangyu of the Li dynasty, who had come as an envoy. I didn't want to go, didn't want to see anyone from the Yun family ever again. But I still couldn't resist Jiangyu's persistent coaxing. He said this would be my first official appearance as crown princess before the Wei Kingdom's royal family of extraordinary significance. The birthday banquet was held at the Linshui Hall in the Imperial Garden, with wine cups clinking and singing and dancing creating a peaceful atmosphere. I sat beside Jiangyu, listlessly stirring the lotus seed soup in my bowl, trying my best not to look at the complicated gazes of my parents and Yunshu at the lower seats of the main table. The banquet was halfway through, at its liveliest moment, when suddenly hurried footsteps came from outside the hall, and a eunuch stumbled and scrambled in. "Your Majesty, Empress Dowager, something terrible has happened. The fifth prince has fallen into the water in the back garden." At these words, everyone present was shocked. A group of people rushed to the back garden. Just as they rounded a moon gate, they saw many palace servants already gathered by the lake. Upon closer inspection, Yun Chuyao and Yun Shu were being firmly pressed to the ground by two imperial guards, unable to move. An old nanny responsible for looking after the fifth prince was crying and pointing at Yun Chuyao, tearfully accusing her to the emperor who had rushed over. "It is her! It is her!" Just now the little prince was playing with a small ball by the lake and accidentally hit this Miss Yun's skirt with it. The little prince was about to step forward to pick up the ball and apologize when she glared at him furiously and viciously pushed the little prince into the lake. Yun Chuyao's whole body trembled, her face pale as paper. Her eyes swept over everyone in panic, and finally, she stared fixedly at Yun Shu beside her. As if grasping at a last straw, she screamed out crying, "It wasn't me! It wasn't me! It was brother!" Brother thought the fifth prince was in his way, so he pushed him down. "What did you say?" Yun Shu suddenly raised his head, looking at Yun Chuyao in disbelief. Those eyes that were once full of doting affection now held only shock, disappointment, and bone-chilling coldness. Yun Chuyao interrupted him desperately, tears flooding out as she performed with great emotion. "It was you just said. The fifth prince was merely born of an unfavored concubine of lowly status, an eyesore to you. How dare you do it but not admit it now?" Yunshu looked at her face, twisted with jealousy and fear. His lips moved, but he couldn't say a single word. He just felt that the person before him was terrifyingly unfamiliar. At this moment, a guard came forward holding a brocade box and knelt on one knee. "Your Majesty, this is an object that was tightly clutched in the fifth prince's hand before he fell into the water. It seems to have been torn from the assailant during the struggle." The brocade box opened, and inside lay quietly a pearl button with a bright luster. That style, that quality, was exactly the same as the one sewn on the dress Yun Chuyao was wearing today. Both witness and physical evidence were present. My parents suddenly looked up, staring in disbelief at the adopted daughter they had doted on for 3 years. You actually framed your own elder brother to escape punishment?" My father trembled with rage. The emperor's expression had long since darkened to the point where water could drip from it. He said coldly, "Guards, Yun Chuyao has a vicious heart, murdered an imperial heir, and her crime is unforgivable. Immediately throw her into the heavenly prison to await judgment. Minister Yun failed to properly educate his daughter and cannot escape blame. Immediately strip him of his third-rank minister position, confine him to his home for reflection, as a warning to others." "No!" Yun Chuyao wailed and screamed. "Your Majesty, spare my life! I didn't know he was a prince. I really didn't know." The imperial edict fell, and my father instantly collapsed to the ground as if all his strength had been drained, his face ashen, and Yun Shu, as if his soul had been ripped away, knelt there rigidly. After a long while, he slowly raised his head, looking past the crowded masses, his gaze piercing through layers of obstacles, staring straight and desperately into my eyes. I only gave him one cold glance before withdrawing my gaze, never lingering again. This lesson is called the knife. Only when it pierces your own flesh do you know the pain. As I turned to leave with Jong-yu behind me, Yunshu's maniacal laughter suddenly rang out. He laughed and laughed, until tears streamed down his face, mixing with the dust, utterly wretched. Retribution, ha 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 ha. It is all retribution. The day I left away and set off for Lee Dynasty, the weather was clear and fine. I sat in the luxurious, spacious carriage, with Jong-yu right beside me, tightly holding my hand. As the carriage reached the city gate, about to leave this city that held too much pain and too many memories for me, suddenly from behind came a familiar, hoarse cry. That voice, carrying a desperate sob, came again and again, penetrating the carriage curtain, crashing heavily into my ears. Xiangshu, Shu, your parents were wrong. Xiangshu, come back and see us. Your parents truly know we were wrong. My hand gripping the carriage curtain paused uncontrollably, fingertips trembling slightly. Jong-yu noticed my unusual state. He didn't speak, only held my hand tighter. In the end, I still couldn't hold back. I lifted a corner of the carriage curtain and looked back. Below the city gate, my father and my mother, those two people who once weighed as heavy as mountains in my heart, were now chasing after the carriage without regard for decorum. Their hair seemed much whiter than the last time I saw them. Their figures in the bleak autumn wind appeared especially frail and aged. Looking at those two familiar yet strange figures, I recalled the days and nights at the Xiangshu Manor, those grievances that were overlooked, misunderstood, and sacrificed. Once again, flooded my heart like a tide. But this time, there was no longer that heart-wrenching pain from before, only a deathly calm remained. Some harm, once inflicted, can never be remedied. Some rifts, once formed, can never heal. Finally, I withdrew my gaze and let that heavy carriage curtain fall down firmly, completely severing me from my past. The carriage drove out of the city gate, heading north all the way. I once thought that following Jong-yu back to Lee Dynasty, becoming his one and only, deeply cherished crown princess, would be the best ending to my story. I thought I had finally found that harbor where I could anchor for life. However, on my very first day stepping into the eastern palace of the Lee Dynasty with great anticipation, reality dealt me a heavy blow. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was organizing the scrolls that Jiang-yu had brought back from Great Way in the hall. Suddenly, a commotion came from outside the hall. A woman in red martial attire, heroic and spirited, wielding a long whip, barged in furiously, ignoring the palace attendants trying to stop her. Before I could react, she raised the barbed whip in her hand and with a fierce whistling sound lashed it viciously onto the golden Nanmu wood desk in front of me. Crack! The precious teacup instantly shattered into pieces, porcelain shards flying everywhere, cutting the back of my hand. I was completely stunned by this sudden turn of events, the back of my hand burning with pain. The woman looked down at me from above, her eyes full of poisonous jealousy and disdain. She arrogantly lifted her chin, her voice clear yet carrying an overbearing pressure. So you are that woman from Wei who thinks she can claim His Highness the Crown Prince with just a bit of beauty. She put away her whip and said word by word, "Do you know that Jong-yu and I have been betrothed since childhood? I, Lin Wei, daughter of the general who pacifies the nation, am the rightful fiancé appointed by the imperial family, the future mistress of this eastern palace." The blood in my entire body froze in that instant. Later, I learned from the palace servants evasive fragments of words that everything she said was true. The Grand General of the nation held half of the Lee dynasty's military power, and was Jong-yu's most important, right-hand man. And Lin Wei, as the only legitimate daughter of the general's manor, grew up together with Jong-yu childhood sweethearts, innocent companions. Their engagement was arranged by the late emperor when he was still alive, known throughout the entire nation. I, Yun Xiangshu, in this marriage that was destined from the start, was nothing but a complete and utter superfluous intruder. It wasn't until evening, when Jong-yu returned after handling state affairs, and saw the mess on the floor, the bloody marks on the back of my hand, and the divorce letter I had already written placed on the table. His face instantly darkened. He pulled me tightly, forcefully into his embrace, his tone full of regret and heartache. I am sorry. Ah Shu, I didn't handle this well. I've never had even the slightest romantic feelings for Lin Wei. In my heart, I only see her as a sister. He cupped my face, urgently promising me. Tomorrow, I'll petition Father Emperor to take back his decree and cancel this absurd engagement. Trust me, I only want you. In that moment, looking at his anxious and sincere eyes, once again, I chose to believe him. I still held on to that last shred of unrealistic fantasy about him. But in the end, I still overestimated how much I weighed in his heart. Or rather, I underestimated how much power and the empire weighed in a man's heart. The next day, what I waited for was not the news of their engagement being called off. Instead, it was the news that Lin Wei knelt outside the general's manor in a rainstorm, begging the royal family to grant the marriage, despite the manor's attempts to stop her. To force the royal family to compromise, she endured the icy rain until she coughed up blood and finally collapsed unconscious. When Zhang Yu heard this news, his expression changed drastically. He didn't even have time to explain anything to me before rushing out of the Eastern Palace without looking back. When he returned, it was already late at night. He reeked of alcohol, his eyes were bloodshot, and his whole person looked so dejected, it was like he'd become someone else. He sat before me, silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke with difficulty, his voice carrying cautious probing and pleading. Shangshu, Lin Wei, she is not going to make it. The general's manor absolutely refuses to back down. Could you, bear with it for now and become my side consort? He didn't dare look me in the eye, his voice growing lower and lower. Later, when the time is right, when her health improves, I didn't hear another word of what came after. I only felt that last bit of remaining, laughable hope in my heart shattered completely into dust with a boom at that moment, side consort, again with bear with it for now. From the Yun family to the Eastern Palace, why does everyone think that the person who should be wronged, who should be sacrificed, is me? I suddenly understood everything. Turns out, I just jumped from one cage into another, more luxurious, more exquisite cage. If I stayed by his side, the rest of my life would just be trapped within these square palace walls, day after day engaging in undercurrents with other women, wagging my tail and begging for a man's favor and affection. Just thinking about days like that makes me feel suffocated, makes me feel it is meaningless. I looked at him and suddenly laughed until tears came out. I wiped away my tears and said to him in a tone I'd never used before, calm without a single ripple. Zhang Yu, let's just call it off. Seeing me get up to leave, Zhang Yu panicked. He suddenly reached out to grab me, his fingertips just touching my sleeve before I resolutely dodged away. I looked into those eyes filled with shock and confusion and said clearly, word by word, you once promised me that with me, you would always be the one who should be cherished most in my heart, and no one could ever abandon me again. You also once promised me that you would never let me suffer even the slightest grievance. Zhang Yu, don't make promises you can't keep, because they really hurt. That day, I walked alone out of the Eastern Palace's corridor that seemed to have no end. In the end, Zhang Yu still didn't forcibly stop me, perhaps out of deep guilt, or perhaps understanding that he had ultimately wronged me. He wrote with reddened eyes a letter of wife dismissal, stamped with the crown prince's seal, and arranged for me a travel permit for free status in the Lai dynasty. The bitter, cold wind blew against my body, very cold, but my heart felt an unprecedented sense of lightness and freedom. This time, I didn't cry, nor did I make a scene. I simply calmly grasped the power to choose my own life firmly back into my own hands. The customs of the Lai dynasty were much more progressive than those of Great Wei. Women could also show their faces in public, become officials, do business, as long as you had the ability. I didn't linger long in the capital, but hired a carriage, took the sum of silver Zhang Yu left me, that was enough for a comfortable life for the rest of my days, and headed south all the way to the most prosperous water town in the south of the Li dynasty, Sucheng. On the busiest waterfront street in Sucheng, I took over a 3-story tall tavern. I named it Wang Yu Pavilion. May those who come here temporarily forget their worries. And may I myself be able to forget the past and start anew, 3 years later. Now, my Wangyu Pavilion has become a tavern quite famous throughout all of Suchang and even the entire Jiangnan region. It is no longer merely a tavern, but has become an elegant place where literati compose poetry and wealthy merchants conduct business. I, Yun Shangshu, am no longer the minister's daughter who needed to depend on anyone, nor the crown princess. I am the proprietor of Wangyu Pavilion, the boss Yun, that everyone in Suchang must address respectfully. No one dares to look down on me anymore, and no one can control my fate anymore. Jiang Yu occasionally comes by. Sometimes he visits incognito with friends, sits by the window, and silently drinks a pot of wine without saying a word. Sometimes he sends someone to deliver some specialties from Great Way, saying they are gifts from an old friend. As for whether he later married that childhood sweetheart General Lin Wei and made her his empress, I didn't deliberately inquire. Those things have nothing to do with me anymore. On another gentle breezy afternoon, I sat on the terrace on the 3rd floor of Wangyu Pavilion, warming a pot of newly brewed peach blossom wine for myself. Downstairs, the gentle and melodious pingtan tunes unique to the Jiangnan water towns, accompanied by the cheerful laughter of diners, created a scene of peaceful worldly life. The wine in my cup emptied, and the past scattered away. I suddenly remembered long ago that self standing atop a tall building, abandoned by the whole world, filled with despair. In the past, I was always trapped in the obsession of being abandoned, treating others' love and choices as the only measure of my own worth. Later, after experiencing so much, I finally began to learn to slowly shift my gaze from others back to myself. For the first time, I seriously asked myself, what do I like? What do I want? What kind of person do I want to become? Looking back on those things from the past now, I don't feel much resentment anymore. Those regrets of being firmly chosen over by family or by lovers have ultimately turned into a clear mirror, allowing me to see my true self within it. It turns out the best life was never about making anyone regret, nor about proving anything to anyone, but rather letting myself live freely, comfortably, and with a clear conscience. I raise my glass, toasting toward the distant sunset, and toasting to myself as well. From now on, I, Yun Shangshu, am my own most resolute choice, my own sole and unshakable destiny. That is enough. Honestly, as a college student who has read countless stories, Faye really thought at first this would be a traditional fallen heiress meets fallen prince. They join forces, slap faces in revenge, and reach the peak of life's sweet and satisfying trope. The first half was indeed incredibly satisfying. When Jiang Yu made his dazzling entrance as the crown prince of Li dynasty with his peerless grace, standing up for the female lead and grinding that hypocrite Xie Jinji into the ground, Faye, like everyone else, felt thoroughly exhilarated and wanted to stand up and applaud in front of the screen. But if the story just stopped at the crown prince domineeringly protects his wife, Yun Shangshu would merely have gone from the minister's daughter abandoned by her birth family to a crown princess dependent on foreign imperial power, saved by the male lead. That would fall into the cliché of entrusting one's fate to someone else. The reason a masterpiece is a masterpiece lies in how the author, with a stroke of the pen, cruelly shatters the fairy tale dream. The most essential, most sublime, and most piercing part of the story is precisely that moment when Jiang Yu asks her to become a concubine. Fam, let's put ourselves in the female lead's shoes. You just escaped from a suffocating family, exhausted physically and mentally. Then a man appears who understands your grievances, gives you the grandest favoritism, and promises you are his only exception. You think he is a ray of light, your last salvation in this life. But in the blink of an eye, faced with consolidated imperial power and enormous pressure from his childhood sweetheart, that light dims. With reddened eyes, he begs you, Shangshu, can you bear with it for now and become my concubine? That phrase, bear with it for now, is the ultimate heartbreaker. How much clarity and how ruthless a resolve does it take to decisively pull away in that moment? In real relationships, we girls are really too prone to compromising because of sunk costs. He was so good to me before, he even stood up for me. He has his difficulties, after all she is the daughter of the nation, protecting general. Concubine is fine as long as I am the one he loves most in his heart. So many girls end up this way, retreating their boundaries through repeated self-brainwashing, ultimately trapping themselves in the inner chambers of a grand estate, reduced to accessories competing with other women for attention. But Yoon Sang-soo didn't. With her turning away, she told all girls a cruel but truthful reality. All relationships that fly the flag of love, but require you to compromise and humble yourself to maintain them, are poison wrapped in sugarcoating. Never gamble on someone's future conscience. When Faye read the part where she walked out of the Eastern Palace holding the divorce letter, she really applauded in admiration. She didn't cry and make a scene like many resentful women, didn't hysterically accuse Jong-yu of breaking his promise. She just very calmly realized, oh, so I merely jumped out of one muddy pit and walked into another more luxurious gilded cage. Since they're both cages, then I'll smash this cage with my own hands. Looking at the first half of Yoon Sang-soo's life, she was actually always caught in the internal struggle of longing to be loved. At the minister's manor, she longed for her parents' approval, longed for her brother's protection, so she would defend herself with reddened eyes saying, "I didn't push her." When throwing the embroidered ball, she longed for her childhood friend Shi Jinji's firm choice. Even when meeting Jong-yu, subconsciously she was still longing for a savior. She had always been using others' love and choices as the only measure of her own worth. But after arriving in Jangyeon and becoming Bosyeon of Wangyu Pavilion, she finally welcomed her true rebirth through nirvana. She finally understood to never be abandoned. The only way is to be your own most steadfast support. What is the best revenge? It is not spending your whole life making Yoon Shu regret, not tearing off Yoon Chuyao's disguise, and not competing for favor with that General Lin's daughter. The best revenge is the light boat has already passed 10,000 mountains. When she stood under the slanting sun of Su City, watching the tavern she built with her own hands bustling with voices, everything in the capital, her biased father's downfall, her brother Yoon Shu's desperate tears of collapse, Shi Jin's regretful murmurs, even Jong-yu's lonely figure during his incognito visit, all of it became a backdrop that had nothing to do with her. They couldn't even stir the slightest bit of her emotions anymore. This is the true meaning of forgetting worries. Not dwelling on the past, not fearing the future. Boss Yun, who walked out of the mire, no longer needs anyone's charity. Nor does she need the title of crown princess to prove her worth. Peach blossom wine, pingtan ballads, account books with daily profits pouring in, a fulfilled and free soul. This is the path a true female lead should walk. Dear girls, through Yoon Sang-soo's story today, Faye really wants to have a heart. To heart with you all. In life, we may also encounter biased parents, lovers who break their promises, unfair treatment, and sometimes, like the female lead at the beginning, feel like we're someone who can be abandoned at any time. But please remember, just because others don't choose you doesn't mean you are not good enough. As long as you don't give up on yourself, you'll always hold the cards to turn things around. Go read, go build your career, go enrich your soul. When you stand high enough, those who once hurt you won't even have the qualification to look up at you. Alright. That is it for this episode of our exhilarating and healing novel companion reading. This story really gave Faye tremendous shock and strength. I wonder if you guys in front of the screen feel the same way. Which stage of Yoon Sang-soo's decisions do you like the most? If it were you, facing Jong-yu's line, "Be my concubine," could you walk out of the Eastern Palace as decisively as she did? Or would you hesitate because of that past favoritism? Come to the comment section and have a lively discussion with Faye. I'll read every comment carefully. If you enjoyed today's video and found this clear-headed female lead's story both satisfying and enlightening, please give Faye a big thumbs up. May we all have the confidence to turn around and the composure to savor peach blossom wine. Live freely, comfortably, and unshakeably as ourselves. See you in the next video. Don't miss it. Bye-bye.